Welcome to Stand Firm. It's crazy to me that this is finally coming to fruition. My name is Eden Pope here with Stand Firm, and this is my show. And I'm super excited to be here with you guys. I was kind of thinking about, what was I going to talk about for my very first show? And this one's a monologue, so it's just going to be me talking. And I wanted to give you guys an introduction to me. I think it's super important that you, as the listeners, are able to really connect with me. And in order to do that, I think you really need to get a good sense of who I am. And I want to get to know all of you guys. I think we're going to have such an amazing journey together. And so I wanted to quickly start off by introducing myself, a little bit about me. And then what we're actually going to do is we're going to kind of dive into childhood a little bit today. I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to discuss, and I want to try and go a little bit in chronological order with this series of how the different parts of you and your experiences make up who you are, right? And so it made the most sense to me to start with childhood because that's where all of your experiences begin. That's where all of the things that impact you down the road begin. And there's so many aspects of childhood that we're going to cover in my episodes. But today, specifically, we're going to focus on memories. What are your memories? What kind of memories you have and how they impact you as you grow into your adolescence and into adulthood. Because I think that's super, super important. And I'm so excited to dive into that with you guys today. But to start off, I wanted to, again, give you a little bit of introduction to me. So I'm from Arizona. I'm originally born in Wisconsin. I was only there for about 4 years because my dad was in dental school at the time. So I moved to Arizona when I was about four. And honestly, I don't have a ton of memories from my really young childhood. And I think that's kind of where my desire to kind of talk about memories began, was because when I was in high school, I had to kind of write a paper about my experiences as a young child in my childhood. But I remember trying to write that paper, and it was very difficult for me because I was like, wow, I can't really remember everything from my childhood. Is there something wrong with me? Did I have some deep-seated rooted trauma that I can't remember for some reason? So, as I've gotten older and through my time in undergrad as well, I was asked about my childhood a lot, and for some reason there was a lot of things that I couldn't remember. So, that was a big reason why I wanted to talk about memories today. But to go back to my childhood, like I said, being in Arizona growing up, my parents got divorced when I was about 4. So, as soon as we moved to Arizona, they got divorced, and I had one sister at the time, and my mom remarried, my dad remarried. And so I kind of had blended families. I had step siblings, but then they each got divorced as well. So a lot of, tumultuous times growing up. There was a lot of divorce, a lot of chaos, a lot of instability. And so when I used to think about my childhood for a long time, I thought maybe there was some trauma there that I wasn't really aware of. Maybe there was things that I needed to deal with that I hadn't, and maybe that was having an impact on me in my relationships and things like that. But as I've done a lot of research on memories and childhood memories, I've come across a lot of distinctions in my research, and those are things that I wanted to share with you guys today. So I'm going to dive into who I am a little bit more in further episodes, but for now, I just kind of wanted to give you guys a brief introduction again of where I'm from and a little bit of a basis of my childhood just to kind of start the foundation. And then as time goes, we're going to build on my experiences, my life. And as I share my experiences, I'm going to be tying in topics that I think are super important because I think that is able to help you guys relate to what I'm talking about. But then at the same time, it also gives you guys a personal connection to the topics that we're discussing as well. Because not everybody's going to be able to relate to every single topic that I'm talking about. But if you can really kind of resonate with another human being, you find an emotional connection. It allows you to kind of sympathize a little bit more and potentially even empathize. So, what I wanted to kind of first talk about with memories is as a child, you have so many different experiences. And as you grow up, your brain chooses to compartmentalize memories based on the situations that they occurred in, based on the emotions surrounding the event, and based on how they had an impact on your psyche and your subconscious. So going back to high school when I had to write that paper about my childhood, I was like, what the heck? Why can't I remember so many things? Like, I just remember snippets. I remember like little blinks of time and very random things. Like, I remember sitting in my mom's apartment with a bowl flipped upside down, eating a frozen dinner because she couldn't afford plates. So I just remember sitting on the ground with a bowl flipped over and eating my frozen dinner. That was just a glimpse. I remember my dad taking me to carnival and we ate sushi beforehand. And so at this carnival, we went on these like twisty cup things, and then on the way back he barfed all over the sidewalk multiple times and I was sick, and little snippets, and sometimes they don't really have any significance. And I really kind of tried to understand and dive more into these memories and understand, why do we keep some, why do we quote unquote repress some, and why are we forgetting some? And I think that that is an important thing to talk about because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, those memories have an impact on you as an adult. And so, first and foremost, let's kind of separate the types of memories that we have. So, I think it's super common to assume that if you don't remember something about your childhood, there must be trauma there, especially with like this generation being super gung ho about mental health, which to an extent is fine, of course. But I think it's super easy for us to just kind of automatically assume that things that we've forgotten are traumatic. And that's not necessarily true. As you grow up, you have what's called neuroplasticity in your brain. So, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change and develop and mold itself. Neuroplasticity usually occurs throughout childhood as a result of challenges, things that you face that make you quote unquote better, or they help you develop so that in the future you can do that same thing without getting hurt or making it easier. It's just kind of growing and developing the natural process and order of things. But as you grow, you develop this neuroplasticity and you have what's called synaptic pruning. So, quite literally, that pruning process of cutting a tree is a very, very similar ideology in the brain. So, you have this synaptic pruning occurring as a result of neuroplasticity because, again, neuroplasticity is those new connections being formed. And so, what synaptic pruning does is your brain says, okay, we're forming these new connections. Let's cut away old ones because we don't need them anymore. We've developed a higher order efficiency of new ones. And so the synaptic pruning occurs, and sometimes it will snip away memories that you no longer need because, one, they potentially didn't serve you any purpose and they didn't have any emotional connection. And that's the key there. Emotional connection is super, super big. We're emotional creatures as humans. And so your brain is very, very fascinating in the sense that if you're a child and you have an emotional experience, your brain will actually hold on to that memory way stronger if there's an emotional attachment tied to it. You have what's called your limbic system in your brain. It's actually very poorly understood. There's so much research going into it, which, why, as somebody who wants to be a future psychiatrist, I find this very fascinating. You have your amygdala, which is part of your limbic system, and that transmits your emotional feelings to the hippocampus, which is where you store your memories. So, if you take the route per se of your amygdala taking the emotions and connecting them with a memory, you are going to store them, you're going to hold on to them much more. And if that memory had a significant impact on your life, then we call that a core memory. So I wanted to kind of differentiate between, those two things of a memory just being forgotten because it didn't serve you any purpose versus a memory being forgotten because it was traumatic. And I think that it's important that we differentiate those two things. Now, why is it important that we even talk about memories that have been traumatic for us? It's very interesting. Sigmund Freud actually kind of coined this term of dissociative amnesia or repressed memory. So, repressed memory was a phenomenon that really gained a lot of popularity in the 1990s, which essentially was saying that you completely forget a memory because it was very traumatic for you. So, for example, if somebody underwent sexual abuse, they're going to have a repressed memory. They're now an adult. They've blocked that part out of their childhood. They no longer remember it. And so it's theorized that the brain does this in order to protect itself. Unfortunately, and kind of surprisingly, there really has not been a lot of conclusive research on this. While we do understand that people can kind of dissociate from these instances that occur when they are children, it's actually not proven that they completely forget these memories. What's more significant is that we see people store the memories that are traumatic in a different way than they would if that memory was a healthy situation. So, for example, if, a 16-year-old is having sex with her boyfriend for the first time, they're in love, it's something that is super healthy between the two of them. It's a mutually consented decision. They've been in a relationship for 2 years, whatever it may be. and they consent to this, they have sex, that's going to be a memory for them that is going to be a good, happy memory. It's an emotional memory that's going to stay with her forever. But let's say she's 14. I mean, she could even be 16, but let's say she's 14 years old. She is home alone. Someone breaks in. She gets raped. And this is a very unfortunate circumstance. But this is a very emotional thing, regardless, because it's impacting so much of the deepest parts of yourself. You're very vulnerable, but it's forced, right? And so her brain does not know how to comprehend what's happening to her body because the emotional connection is not there, but there's something emotional happening to you. So that even though this girl is having sex in both instances, she is not storing that memory and she will not perceive that memory the same way. And that is important. And we're going to discuss that a little bit later on. But the reason it's stored differently is because what the brain will do is it's going to store that memory by trying to separate the emotion out of it. And when the brain separates the emotion out of a situation that should be emotional, it is very confusing. And we see that in sexual assault victims, this is very common, where we call this disassociation, right? We call it dissociative amnesia. And this is another concept that I kind of want to clarify in regards to differentiating that between what Freud called repressed memory. So, like I mentioned, there's really not a ton of evidence that repressed memory is super concrete, especially because it's really hard to prove. You know what I mean? If you have somebody in your chair that you're talking to, if I'm a psychiatrist, I have a patient, and I'm trying to access a repressed memory, um, the only way that we've seen that that's possible is through psychotherapy and hypnosis. Hypnosis is recognized in the psychiatric community and the medical community. Some people still see it as taboo. It has been proven to work in certain circumstances. But the problem with that is when we draw out those repressed memories that somebody has forgotten, it's actually shown that 15% of the time, those memories that we draw out of people in hypnosis are false. And at first, you might think to yourself, well, that's 15%. That's not a lot, right? But when you think about it, a lot of these people that have what we call repressed memories or what we think are repressed memories, this often is a result of sexual abuse or something that probably is going to be legally implicated. So, oftentimes, hypnosis is used in court. And so, the gravity of the situation is very large when you have a 15% error rate in the legal system because you could be extrapolating a memory that doesn't exist. And that's not necessarily the therapist's fault because, they could be suggestive. They might be like, oh, were you abused? Were you this? And when you put that idea in somebody's head, sometimes that can create a false narrative that they've experienced something traumatic, and then that might lead to false accusations. So they might truly believe that they were physically abused, they were hit by a spouse or something like that. And so they might blame that person now, even though that potentially didn't even happen. So that's a very high error rate when it comes to extrapolating repressed memories. Um, so I think that's really important to understand that there's really not a whole lot of concrete evidence for them. And then in addition, it's really hard to get them out of people. So again, we see much more evidence for what we call dissociative amnesia, which I touched on, of your brain storing memories in a different way. And they do that to protect themselves. Your brain does that to protect you. And so in a recent study of 50 women who were sexually assaulted, um, I have some quotes from these people in this study. And so they talk about their experience and what it felt like to be in that situation. So this one girl said, I was trapped in the past and the present without a future. I couldn't imagine a future for myself. And so that's very, very powerful because they call this a drift in time and space. This is very common in people who have experienced any type of sexual abuse. Um, and as they go back, right, and they are trying to access this memory, they don't really have a ability to comprehend the time and the space around which this event was happening because again, the brain is trying to reduce its level of consciousness, its level of awareness. Um, And then we see another one where a girl says, "In fact, I didn't actually live life. I watched life pass by." We have another one. "When we napped, my father's hands used to travel all over in hidden places. I always felt a sort of doubt. I wasn't sure what was happening. Did it happen? When I thought that my father was doing these things to me, I was sure that I was hallucinating, that I was insane." So you immediately see these women recounting these memories because in this study, they're older now. They're talking about their memories from their past. She's doubting herself, right? Um, this other girl was seeing life pass her by, right? They're spectators of their own life. And this really ties into a very big part of why I think this needs to be brought up and why I'm discussing it in our very first episode is because I mentioned in my preview that I was going to get dirty. I was going to talk about things that people don't want to talk about. I was going to get down into the nitty-gritty of everything because that's where a lot of stuff matters because it's stuff we don't talk about. It's things we don't have answers to because nobody wants to talk about them because they don't want to be taboo. But I don't care. I want to talk about these things. I think we have the ability to do that in a respectful manner. I know that this is a difficult topic, but again, it's one that's necessary to be discussed. So we see these sexual assault victims, and they're almost, again, a spectator of their own life. They're outside of their own reality. And what this does is it really creates a sense of helplessness. And if these girls are not able to deal with this trauma when it happened, then what happens is they grow up and they never resolve this problem and they never change that mentality that they have about themselves. And this is so critical to understand because my whole mantra for this show is helping women become their best self, right? Become self sufficient, become independent, recognize your potential. But there is no way you are ever going to be fully independent if you see yourself as helpless. That's a complete oxymoron. They're contradictory statements. So I wanted to say one other quote from this girl because this is another part of these memories when people experience trauma that's super important. And she says, on one hand, it was an amazing experience, but on the other hand, I don't remember it. And so this girl's referring to traveling. She was traveling to Asia. And so she mentions how it was a great experience traveling to Asia, but on this trip, she was abused. So again, on one hand, it was an amazing experience, but on the other hand, I don't remember it. I mean, that I remember and I don't remember. I was there or I wasn't there. The level of emotional involvement wasn't there. The excitement, the enthusiasm. I remember traveling around Hong Kong, America, seeing amazing sights, but not really. I remember and I don't remember. There is no absorption. The gulf between the body and the mind is enormous. And so, like we mentioned earlier, this is very common where women will dissociate. The brain will dissociate from the body to save itself. And so these memories are distorted. And so this girl's felt feelings of being disconnected from her thoughts, feelings, body sensation, and surroundings. That is an actual term called depersonalization and derealization. So that's actually a disorder. And I think that it's important that we understand this because if you don't fix this, it really can create a literal disorder down the road if you don't fix these feelings. So kind of let's take a step back for a second. What have we kind of understood so far? So first and foremost, we understand that your childhood memories have an impact on you as an adult. If you don't remember some things, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was traumatic. Because of neuroplasticity and synaptic pruning, you can just forget things because they didn't have any relevance or importance. However, when you do have traumatic experiences and you do have trauma and you've kind of suppressed those memories or you've disassociated, those memories do have an impact on you as an adult if you do not deal with those traumas when they happen. And if you have blanks in your childhood or you don't remember those memories in a way that seems normal or fluid, then that's oftentimes what we call dissociative amnesia, your brain's inability to fully store that memory in a proper, fluent way. And then we have the other term, which is repressed memory, which again is not quite as studied or researched and really involves a complete blank, absolutely no memory whatsoever of that childhood. So, why does why does this matter? Obviously, being sexually abused is bad. And that's not the point of this monologue. And I don't mean to devalue anybody's experience by saying that, because there will be other episodes where we dive deeper into sexual abuse. Um, but the reason that this is so important to memories and why I'm using sexual abuse as my main character, because there's different types of abuse, right? There's mental, there's emotional, there's physical, like somebody being beaten. Um, the reason that I'm using sexual abuse in today's topic of memories is because it's so prevalent, right? I'm going to talk about things that are affecting a large majority of people, if I can, because that's going to be the most relatable topics, right? And so it's crazy to me because I wanted to share some statistics about women who have been abused and why it's important to recognize this abuse when it's not taken care of. So, 1 in 9 girls will experience sexual assault, and 82% of all child abuse happens to women, and 88% of that abuse is caused by men. So, the perpetrator, 88% of the time, is going to be a man. And the effects of sexual abuse, they are long lasting, right? And they affect the victim's mental health, obviously, as we've discussed. And victims by far are way more likely to experience so many mental health challenges, including drug abuse, PTSD, and major depressive disorder. In fact, girls that are sexually abused are 4 times more likely to develop drug abuse. They're 4 times more likely to experience PTSD as adults, and they're 3 times more likely to develop major depressive disorder. So, the reason that I talk about this is because we see a rise in so many mental health problems in adolescents and in young adults. And abuse not being handled is a large component of why we see such a high skyrocket and all of these mental problems that we're facing. And again, these childhood memories and experiences that we're having, if they are not mentally stored appropriately and that trauma is not appropriately handled and you don't heal from it, you develop these mental problems later down the road. And why does that matter for being, the woman that I know you have the potential to be? Because it makes you feel like you are not in control. Control is the biggest factor here. And this is one of the main points that I want you guys to all understand is that as a woman, we often feel so out of control because we look to authority figures to be that control center for us. So, in victims who have been abused, they have their abuser as the authority figure. That authority figure is making the decisions for them, right? And so when you're abused as a child, you don't have control over your situation. Your brain tries to cope by storing that memory in a strange way. And when you don't have the ability to resolve that situation in a healthy manner, who you were in the moments that those things were happening to you becomes part of your identity because you continue to think about it. Let me repeat that one more time. When you don't have the ability to resolve your traumatic situations in a healthy manner, who you were in the moments that that trauma happened to you becomes part of your identity because you continue to think about it. Remember, who you are as an individual is accumulation of your experiences. And so these experiences have an impact on you. And this is why what happens in your childhood matters. This is why your memories about your childhood matter because they have an impact on you. And you have the ability, even now as an adult, if you have these problems, you do have the ability to face them. You have the ability to cope with them. But what we can do better is be aware for our kids, our younger generation, that they have someone to talk to, that they have people that they can reach out to so that they can get help, so that they don't develop these debilitating problems that turn into the mental health crisis that we're seeing now. And having a parent that you can talk to about anything is super important. My dad is my best friend. Um, Growing up, like I mentioned, my parents were divorced, and my dad really, really struggled when him and my mom got divorced. And my dad and I really created a very strong bond emotionally um, when they got divorced. And he's been there for me through everything. And I've always felt comfortable talking to him, especially about very difficult things that have happened to me in my life. And I think it's so critical that you have a parent you can talk to. And that's a really big problem is we see a huge disparity in kids in their relationship with their parents and their ability to have good, solid, healthy communication. Um, and, a couple more things I want to touch on is that when you have unresolved trauma, so, adults, my adult ladies that I'm talking to now, when you have this unresolved trauma, it creates the phrase, you become a victim of your circumstances. It creates a victim mentality. And this can continue your entire life, especially if you don't recognize it. So, again, I'm here to talk about these difficult situations because they need to be talked about, they need to be exposed, they need to be discussed. So, again, you have a perpetrator who say is abusive. That person is your authority figure. As we grow up, even for people who are not abused throughout your childhood, think about your authority figures that you would look up to, your teachers, your coaches. And so it's important that we recognize that these authority figures are there to help us, of course. They are there to make sure that we are on the right track. We look to them for help, we look to them for guidance because they have experience, they're there to coach us. But it becomes very easy to lean on them and look to them for acceptance. For example, again, I mentioned that my dad is my best friend, but for a good chunk of my childhood, I leaned a little too heavily on his acceptance for my life. And only now have I kind of come to recognize that that wasn't necessarily healthy. And he even had a conversation with me about that when I was in my undergraduate degree in college. Is he said, "Hey, I want you to get good grades and I want you to do all these things, but I want you to do them for you because I want you to want to do them for you. I want you to be happy. I want you to feel fulfilled and independent." And same thing with coaches. I played volleyball and I remember I'd be on the court and I would always look back to my coach because I'd want his approval, I'd want his acceptance, and I would be like, what does he want me to do next? And sometimes you forget to think for yourself when you're always reliant on authority figures. And this creates a sense of helplessness. And that is a very, very dangerous territory you you kind of wade into because at the end of the day, your authority figures are there to coach you and help you so that you can grow up and be your own authority figure. And so when people experience things like abuse, they create that victim mentality for themselves. They create a sense of helplessness for themselves. Again, like those girls mentioned, they watched their life pass them by. You become a spectator for your own life because you're so used to somebody else running the game of your life for you. And this is so critical, you guys. I need you to understand you have to become your own authority figure for your own life because once you grow up, nobody else is going to do it for you. And that's why we see so many people getting lost. That's why we see people looking for external validation in social media. We see a ton of insecurity today in the younger generation and in young adults because we haven't learned how to be our own authority figure because we haven't learned how to trust ourselves. And that's kind of that next and one of my last points that I want to get to is how do you become your own authority figure so that you can live a life that you can enjoy? How do you learn to trust yourself to make your own decisions? Because again, we go back to our memories. If we see a memory that resulted from abuse, we were a victim, we don't have that sense of confidence. We're insecure. We don't have that sense of authority. We're afraid and we don't trust ourselves. How do you learn to trust someone? You've heard of a trust fall, right? You trust that when that person falls, you're going to catch them. And that's how people trust you. You trust your best friends in your life because you've gone through difficult things together. That's how trust is developed, by staying by someone's side through a difficult time. You have to learn how to trust yourself. And the way that you can do that is by doing difficult things, by going through hardships, knowing that you can come out on the other side okay. And I think that's a big problem, is we're so afraid to fail. We're so afraid that we're not going to be okay that we don't jump ship anymore. We don't jump in with both feet. But you know what? It's really important that you learn to trust yourself. And sometimes you are going to fail, and that's okay. And sometimes it's even better for you to fail and realize that life isn't over. You have to learn how to trust your judgment, because you have to fail in order to win. You have to fail in order to succeed. And so when you do succeed, it's the best feeling. And that's a huge milestone for you as an individual and as a woman, to learn how to trust yourself, that, okay, I can make decisions for myself. I am a competent woman. I do have the capabilities to be my own authority figure. I trust myself. I'm going to look inside myself for my own guidance, and I'm not going to let other things or people determine what I can and can't do. That's up to me. I'm my own authority figure. But you can only get to that mentality when you've healed from past traumas, or you've healed from those insecurities, or from leaning on other people too much growing up. And so that's why it's important to really discuss these topics, you guys. And I really wanted to kind of just end with 3 steps that I think really can solidify this concretely. I mentioned, learning how to trust yourself. Um, and also study. Think about the authority figures in your life. How does someone become a coach? Right? You think about the best coaches in the world. They were once probably great athletes. They've taken their time. They're the best at what they do. Um, and then you think about a teacher, right? They've had to get a degree so that they can teach you things. All of the authority figures in your life typically are, they're experts in their field, because it's some, you can make decisions for yourself, but if they're stupid decisions, then that's not going to get you anywhere, right? That's not going to lead you to a life that you love. You could be your own authority figure per se, but if you just go out and drink and party every weekend, you don't have any goals for yourself, that's not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to create the woman you want to be. Um, so remember, study, put effort into the things or the mindset that you want to have. For example, read self-help books. They're so helpful. I've read so many self-help books myself personally that have just changed little things about my day. And again, cumulatively, that makes such a large impact on your life. And I read self-help books because I know that I am capable of making those changes. It's about taking that control and placing it on yourself, recognizing that you have this control to do things with your life, to make your life what you want it to be. And then finally, confidence is key, you guys. I will say this forever, fake it till you make it. It's true. It's so easy to feel not confident about yourself, but at the end of the day, a it's a decision. Like, you just make the decision to be confident. And when you just choose that every single day, with time, it comes. Um, and confidence is not just necessarily in what you look like. Be confident in your small decisions. Don't ask for somebody's advice about a small thing. As a girl, I know you ladies know what I'm talking about when I say this. Pick the restaurant. Pick where you want to eat. Choose your hair color without the advice of somebody else. It's little things like that that lead you to be confident, and that confidence in turn leads you to trust yourself. And when you trust yourself, you feel more competent in making very difficult decisions. And then that eventually turns into you being your own authority figure. I want you guys to trust yourselves. I want you guys to love yourselves. And when we kind of take a step back today and think about what I've discussed, when we look at our childhood traumas, when we look at how we grew up, if we don't resolve the negative things that happen to us, if we don't learn how to process those memories that have been stored in a way that separates our emotion from us, if we don't learn how to break off the training wheels from our authority figures, and do things on our own and heal and learn that we are not a victim. We learn to embrace, being able to make decisions for ourselves. That is how you start. And again, my mantra is creating the best life for you possible. I want that for you guys. I really, really do. But the first step is recognizing that you are your own authority figure, that you have the capabilities to do anything that you want to do. But that first requires a mindset shift. Before you can take any action, you have to change your mentality. I firmly believe that because I've personally experienced it myself. And at the end of the day, when you're in control, the options are endless and the opportunities are limitless. I hope that this episode was beneficial for you guys in some way. I know I didn't dive a whole lot into me as an individual. I wanted to sprinkle a little bit of that in there to kind of give you guys some introduction to me. And again, in further episodes, I'm going to be going more in depth into me, my experiences. But today, this is what I wanted to share. And I hope that you guys take the time, look back at your childhood. If there's things that you have not dealt with and you feel like you are being held back in life, deal with those things, deal with those traumas, because it starts in our childhood and we grow from there. You have to have a solid foundation. You have to fortify your foundation and then build the life that you've always dreamed of from there. And I promise you, you will love it. Thank you guys, and we'll see you soon.